everybody. This is Chris Torrence over at Optym. I want to welcome everybody for joining another episode of Semi-Related here with Optym. Again, as always, want to thank our sponsors and partners here at Market Scale, top the wonderful Bank of America building here in downtown Dallas. Again, the view never gets old. With me today, we have a very, very special guest that many of you probably know to some extent or another. No, I do. His name is Bart De Muynck. And I wanted to kind of let Bart kind of give a little bit of his background today before we get into some of the conversations around hottest topics in the industry, and we'll see where the conversation goes. As always, we like to keep it unscripted, organic, and again, Bart and I have known each other for a while, and there's never really shortage of conversations for us to have. So with that, Bart, welcome, man. Thanks for making the time today.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Great being here.
Yeah.
And what a view, huh?
Yeah, I'd say it never gets old, man. It's,
Right.
And this is not a virtual backdrop. I think some people may assume that, but this is
No
literally-
AI, right? No pun intended.
no
'Cause
AI
we'll
here.
talk
This-
about
that's
it, but
right.
this is all real.
That's right. That's right. Well, Bart, like I said, I think a lot of people in the space know you, at least know of you.
Yeah.
And I think we go back to some quite a few years ago and getting to know each other during your time at Gartner. But I could probably give your bio, but I think it probably comes best from you. So what have you been up to lately, man? Maybe since Gartner. Tell us what's going on.
Yeah, so since Gartner, I left early last year, 2022, went to Project 44, joined
Heard
the
of them.
C-suite.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're a small little startup in the tech space. Now, obviously, real-time visibility was an area that I really was passionate about, and so very happy to join them last year. And then last month, I became, instead of Chief Industry Officer, became Strategic Advisor to Project 44, which opened myself up to also work with other companies, including Optym. So
Yeah, we're so glad
very
to have
happy
you.
to go on
Yeah.
that journey and adding some other customers as well. The goal is really to cover the different functional areas within logistics, kind of end to end with different companies, and provide kind of my advice and thought leadership to the market. And I'm still doing a lot of research and thought leadership. I also write for FreightWaves. And then later this month, I'll have my website go up, Better Supply Chain. So for people that
Get the
want to
plug,
read more about, information about what's going on in supply chains and how to improve supply chain, that's what I'll be writing about.
Awesome. Well, I can't think of anyone better that can cover a high-level overview and just an array of various topics within supply chain. It's also, as fall approaches, conference season, or wedding crasher season, as I sometimes call it. What right now, Bart, and again, I know you're actually attending a show, as of like right now maybe, or one that ended last night?
Yeah.
With another major vendor in the space. So, as we kind of talk today, obviously AI being the buzz, right? We know that. But just before we get into that, Bart, what are some like macro level trends that, since you've kind of, in your new role, been exposed to a lot of different technologies, you're engaging with a lot of cool companies, and I'd like to think we're one of them. But what are some of the macro level trends you're seeing? And again, we know the market's obviously seen better days, and I think we're all speculating without the crystal ball. When is the uptick going to happen? It seems like all the pundits and industry thought leaders seem to have an opinion, but really no one knows. So, with that in mind, that context, just what are some of the other overarching themes that you're seeing as of late?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? And we've seen a lot of variation the last 10 years. Obviously, 5 years ago, saw a lot of new technologies coming into the logistics space. Then obviously COVID hitting. If companies immediately needed some really good capabilities to get through the disruptions. Then obviously the economy started changing. People were kind of maybe take a little bit of a step back and say, what is it that we really want to invest in? Because there's a lot of options there. How do we prioritize? But I would say one of the things that we continuously seeing as we see more and more disruptions, because hopefully the war in Ukraine will stop. And at some point we will see inflation going down and interest rates coming down, the economy picking up, consumer spend picking up again. But what we do see, there's continuously going to be more and more disruption, weather being one of them. We had the bad storm here just last night.
First time I've seen rain, I said
exactly.
Texas for all summer.
Yeah, I think Libya right now is suffering from heavy rainfall. On the other side, we see places like the Panama Canal with drought.
That's right.
So that's not going to go away. That's actually going to get worse. They're even already predicting 2024 will probably be one of the worst years from a weather perspective. So one thing that is overarching is, how do companies really prepare themselves for these disruptions? So a lot of it has to do with technologies that help you to be a lot more agile and resilient. And I would say we talk now a lot about supply chain velocity. With more variability, you need more visibility to what's happening to improve your velocity. So any technology that help companies to really be a lot more agile, meaning if something changes, be able to either build scenarios or very quickly adapt to it, That's incredibly important.
That resiliency factor, right?
Exactly.
That seems to be a new buzzword I'm hearing a lot.
Yeah.
No, I think everything that you mentioned just resonates with me personally. When you think about the overarching supply chain, right, there's all these subcategories in it. Do you have any insight specifically? And again, I'm selfishly going to, the Optym view in terms of logistics, the trucking side.
Yeah.
Any macro level themes you're seeing around that? Obviously, it ties into the broader supply chain.
Yeah.
But just when you think about surface trans, trucking, any macro level trends, again, you're seeing right now?
So on the one hand, right, we have these modern technologies that have really helped us to improve the business we're in, right?
Yeah.
And for example, optimization. It's not new, right? We've been doing optimization for over 30 years. But again, we have these newer technologies like AI that's helping us to go from, I would say, kind of more dumb optimization or less intelligent optimization to very intelligent and very dynamic optimization, which is what we need in time of disruption. And especially as supply chains have sped up. 10 years ago, we had, fewer ways of going to market and fulfill things. And I'm not just talking about last mile, but last mile also has an impact on middle and first mile.
Yeah.
So we have to do things a lot faster, and then things change a lot faster. So although we've become smarter, there are still human aspects to it that haven't changed. Look at this year, just the whole thing with unions, right? The UPS thing, luckily there was a new agreement, so the strike was avoided.
Yeah.
But look at what happened to Yellow. Yellow went bankrupt. That had a huge repercussion on the whole LTL market.
Yeah.
So how do you strengthen yourself against that? Now you're getting all these new customers potentially coming to these other LTL providers that now are having to relook at their network. So they need technology to figure out which part of Yellow could I be interested in buying? How does that fit in my network?
Yeah.
If I take on some of these customers, how did that impact my business?
That's right.
Whether you don't want it to impact it negatively, and we know the rates in trucking are already low.
Yeah.
So all these things are happening that are completely out of your control.
Yeah. It's like in the UAW strike, right? That's another one that I feel like is just starting to emerge as potentially a major disruption, right, within the automotive sector. And you think about that ripple effect as it takes place within vendors, the workforce, the vendors that support that in every stretch of the way. That's I always wonder if there's going to be a stabilization. But I think the way the world is lately, right, it just seems like it's just one thing after another. And obviously, I think what it goes to show, and I often tell people, right, we talk to folks that are outside the industry and often take supply chain logistics for granted, like the air we breathe, right? I'll have to refer to the toilet paper shortage, which I think was, at least in my lifetime, was one of the first key examples of where family, friends, it was all the talk, right? Toilet paper of all things. But it goes to show that, there's a little more to it than how that, just a simple product like that actually gets manufactured, distributed, and ultimately to the retail outlets that we buy from. So I hope more and more people are leaning into what we do. I think you and I have been in this space for a long time before it had any kind of sexy appeal to it. But I like to think that that's starting to change. And as technology starts to really take, front and center stage within our space as well, I think it's attracting a lot of the talent. Speaking of, and you made a kind of point earlier around just that human versus technology, and we could call technology AI or machine learning, right? Oh, do not want to play buzzword bingo, right? Bart, when you think of, you mentioned optimization being a broad stroke earlier, I think AI probably rolls into even broader stroke. So what is AI and supply chain? And again, it's a very subjective answer here. Just want to hear your take. What is that? How when people ask you, how does AI really affect, what are the implications? What are the applications within AI, supply chain, logistics, trucking, et cetera? How do you typically answer when you're speaking on stage as a keynote or just in a casual conversation like this?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a hard thing to answer because AI isn't just one thing. And I think a lot of people maybe out there, you might be thinking, well, AI is this one product. Yeah. It's really not a product. It's a supporting technology. It supports a lot of different functions in supply chain. It goes from supply chain planning. The last two conferences I was at talked about the use of AI and generative AI in supply chain planning to be a lot more dynamic and be a lot more accurate in how you predict demand of customers or how you can reduce inventory, which is a huge issue. Last year, we saw a 19% increase in the U.S. business logistics cost, and half of that increase was due to the increase in inventory carrying costs. Yeah. So it's a big issue. But then you go to logistics, and even there, you can split it up between the warehouse part, where we're seeing a lot of issues around labor shortage in the warehouse. So there's a good argument to say AI can replace people. We're replacing humans by robots. And I should say, we're not really replacing them. We're actually filling in the gap where we don't have the people and automating it with robots. Now in transportation, that's completely different because we're
Yes.
not replacing the human.
Right.
The human stays central at that transportation process. But what we're using AI for, and I call it, in that case, augmented intelligence.
I love that you did that in that recent Freeways article.
Yeah.
I was very quick to chime in and applaud that because I think that's probably a more accurate way of defining AI, at least in logistics.
Yep.
Because I think it takes away this idea of any, like I think I responded, I said, I don't think there's really anything artificial about what we do, right? And I kind of refer to those end users, those experts that have all the tribal knowledge and nuance in their heads. And people often ask me, what's the biggest like competitor in optimization field? I think that's sometimes it. It's all that amazing information and just knowledge in the user's head that has never been really systematically uploaded, if you will.
Right.
And and again, I don't see that happening for years to come. And so again, I like that you talk about AI as in this augmented intelligence. And I hope the people tuning in really take away with understanding it's not about this idea that I think is a fallacy of replacing humans with everything.
Yeah.
And I think that thanks to Hollywood and others that have kind of had this dystopian future outlook. So I think, again, we'll see what happens in due time, but in our lifetime, I don't see anything like that coming to fruition. So again, kudos for calling that out. Bart, you mentioned on that note, what do you envision seeing, and we'll kind of go into trucking, right? I kind of, again, that's our space typically, logistics, brokerage, trucking, 3PL, et cetera. And I love how the article, again, talk about the augmentation part. What specific tasks within, and again, I'll go back to the warehouse, right? Maybe there is some true artificial intelligence with robotics, IoT sensors, right? And I think we can all agree that that's more accurate, the productivity is faster, it just makes sense. But when you talk about the physical world of like the logistics side of it, a little downstream, how do you envision the robots or machines or AI, et cetera, whether it's autonomous, optimization, other versions of technology software, where do you see the biggest opportunity for the technology to augment or as that virtual assistant, and where do you see maybe the tasks that are just not going to probably come to fruition in an automated fashion for the foreseeable future?
Yeah, I think the first one is maybe, let's say, on the lower side of disruption, because there's so much disruption. No one wants to use disruptive technology. People always ask me, Bart, what's the next disruptive technology? And I go, no one needs disruptive technology. We have so much disruption already.
Yeah.
We want to have technology that helps with core tasks.
Yeah.
So let's focus on that. So in trucking, one of the core tasks is dispatch.
Yeah.
So how do you give people the tools to help them do their job, do it better, do it faster, help do more volume of work? Because when people leave, they typically don't get replaced. So everyone's got more tasks on their plate.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we help them with that? And then the other thing is, at the end of the day, how does that technology also help them to enjoy their job better? Because everyone's struggling with talent. It's either retaining talent or attracting talent. So technology plays a vital role in getting people to come and want to join your company. And we also know that specifically in trucking, we've been very conservative in the adoption of new technologies. So unfortunately, probably many of our viewers are still working day in, day out with very old technology. And I go to some of these, universities where I lecture, and I sometimes make the reference to blue screens and green screens, and then someone kind of nudges me and go, hey, these guys have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But it still happens, right? And so these college students, they don't learn about that. And then they come in the real world and they are shocked by how little advanced technology they're using, because they're all used to what they have on an iPad,
supercomputers in their hand,
or even on the iPhone, right? My kids, they look at TV on their phone.
That's all they know. That's
right?
all they know.
Not even on an iPad, although they have it.
Yeah.
They watch it on the phone. So I think that's at the basic of it. How does it really impact day-to-day operations? That makes a huge difference. And then you go to the other spectrum, so autonomous vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
And again, there the question is, well, will autonomous vehicles replace drivers? Now, first of all, there's a huge difference between an autonomous vehicle and a driverless vehicle.
Sure.
Right? So we all know there's multiple levels of autonomy. And right now, there's a local company not too far from here, Kodiak Robotics, who does a great job at that, of having drivers still in the seat, but being assisted by the autonomy.
Sure.
And I can tell you, talking firsthand with those drivers, they love their job a lot more because they're safer. There's no more white knuckling. They have less fatigue when they drive. And by the way, that truck runs back and forth. They're doing a lot of runs Dallas to Atlanta, a lot more than a traditional truck does. So in the end, for the owner of the trucking company, they create a lot more revenue. So that's the world that we have to look in. It's not black and white of I'm replacing the driver. Again, we have a driver shortage. We'll fill the driver shortage, but we're going to change the way it works, meaning maybe those drivers will work more local in the city,
Right.
pickups and drop-offs. And then we can have the autonomous part be on the highway, the long, boring. You probably know in Texas here, we have a lot of highway to cover. And I'll tell you, going like west to El Paso is some of the most boring highway in the world. It's perfect for an autonomous vehicle. So again, there are basic things, there are more advanced things, and autonomous vehicles, they're not going to be in millions of vehicles in the next even 20 years.
Yeah, that's
the opportunity. But again, people don't look at it black and white of it's going to be one or the other, or it's going to replace people. It's going to be a combination of both.
Yeah. And I'm glad you said that. And it's good to hear that you've gotten feedback even from the driver community, the front lines, the backbone of everything we do, right? And I like that you're being realistic on when this technology is probably going to hit scale. And I agree. I think it's at least a decade, if not 2 decades, as you insinuated. So, yeah, and I think you mentioned a good point, right? Going back to the drivers, it's this lifestyle of an over-the-road truck driver relative to what it was in the 70s and 80s. I think it was very, there was a romanticized view on trucking in some ways. But I think you look at the newer generations that are more just tech savvy, looking to kind of be as productive with their time and automate things they deem as just not value added. So it's, again, I love the fact that the drivers themselves are kind of in favor of leveraging this technology where it makes sense.
And maybe one point to add to that, right? And it's maybe romanticized to a point, but it was a pretty good job back in the 60s and 70s.
Yes.
You got to remember, we didn't have as much traffic, as much congestion. So people were more efficient in their work because they weren't held up in yards. They weren't held up so much by traffic on the road. And in the 60s and 70s, being your own boss and making a good living was something people could attain in trucking.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, since the 70s, wages of truckers have not gone up by a lot.
Right.
And now they're almost the least paid if you look at the importance of their job, and probably one of the jobs where I would say the least progress has been made of keeping up with inflation and keeping up with kind of the pay scales.
Yeah.
But there again, the autonomous vehicles and the technology can come in to say, if we can use autonomy to get better productivity out of the asset, that means your asset cost is going to go down. What does that mean, Chris? That means that I can pay that driver more, which in turn will or should attract more drivers to the whole, and not just attracting drivers to the industry, but imagine if you're a young kid and you have all this technology. Now, all drivers, that's the other issue, right? Average driver age somewhere 54, 55. They don't like necessarily all that technology, right? Even if they have the in-cab telematics, they have the video telematics, they might go like Big Brother.
Big Brother, sure.
But young kids, to have them go in a cab, they love all that technology.
Yeah.
So for them being able to interact pretty much with a driving iPhone, for them is exciting. So we have to look at it from that perspective as well.
Absolutely. Now, that's all great points. Well, and you mentioned that there's the age gap, the generational gap, and technology understanding and adoption. I don't think that trend ever really changes. I think our kids will be far more superior, advanced, and newer technologies they emerge over the years, and we'll probably be at some point using them as the help desk, as I often am for my own parents and generations that are above me. So, with that said, there's technology isn't perfect. I often tell people, even as a technology vendor, there's a lot of pros, but there's definitely been challenges. Technology hasn't, the promises made a decade ago around autonomous and other blockchain, crypto, right? We've seen the ebbs and flows of these seasonal technology shifts that I know you're very aware of. When you talk about the barriers to adoption, I think some of that, in my mind at least, goes back to, well, we've given it a chance. For a lot of reasons, it hasn't really come to fruition that we had hoped, or at least what the vision was during the initial phases of discovery and learning about this technology. Why is our industry, do you think, and maybe it's relative to other industries, and I can't speak directly, but I feel like our industry is so complicated and complex, and maybe we've made it that way. Maybe it's just the reality of just the nature of supply chain, right? And you know more than anyone. What are you think are the biggest barriers, again, to the adoption, and what can we do to kind of, in general, speaking, whether it's AI or any other technology, what can we do as people? I'm not a technologist per se, but I'm very into it. What can we do to kind of win them over, the hearts and minds of the skeptics out there that say, hey, I've been down this road, I got burned, I'm tired of dealing with vendors that, we really can't implement or deploy the technology, I can't get my people involved to use it. Again, shame on vendors for not probably taking a stronger stance in supporting that endeavor. But what else? What other ideas do you have for the problems and the solutions for the adoption piece?
Right. So one thing I would say, logistics is a little bit different from the rest of supply chain, the rest of kind of the industry, is that we are very conservative. Yes, we are complex. The other side is we're very conservative. We have not been at the top end of technology adoption, and we now have overcome that. So I will say there's a lot more readiness to use technologies than we had 10, 20, 30 years ago. I started in the 90s, and I started in operations in trucking. We had asset-based trucking, and we had also asset-based warehousing, and I worked in operations in both of those. And I'll tell you, back then, technology was the last on people's mind. Although, my first implementation of vehicle routing was in 97, 98. We implemented telematics when there was these big machines, and they weren't even used for tracking because it was so expensive because of all satellite communication. So we have to overcome that. But I would say across the board, and that's an issue we see any company out there, to really transform your company. And a lot of people talk about digital transformation. What does that mean? Well, there's three main components of it. One is a change of mindset and changing the whole organization and even changing your processes. That's one part. The second part is, do you have the right talent to do that? So it requires a different set of talent, or maybe what we call digital talent, younger people who have a mindset of technology first rather than why do it differently, right? And I've heard that 30 years ago. I still hear it today. It's like, Bart, don't fix it if it ain't broke. Why would we change it if it's worked for 30 years? The third part is technology, but it's only the third part. And don't forget that technology is just the supporting player. Technology, you can't just say everything's wrong. Let's put technology against it. Magically all works. It's not fairy dust, right? You can't expect a vendor to kind of be a magician. That's not how it works. So you have to understand that you have to partner with that vendor. Yet they bring their knowledge, they bring the technology, but your responsibility as a customer is to drive the change throughout the organization, bring that mindset change, bring that change of processes, or work with the vendor to understand what are these improved processes to really take full part of that technology solution, and what other really talent do you need to apply to it. Only then can you have true digital transformation. And what I see that, for example, AI, and I said that in my article as well, I think AI, although it's still accelerating very fast and we have new capabilities almost on a daily basis, most people aren't ready to take full advantage of it because their mindset is different. Just look at analytics, right? We talk about advanced analytics, which is one of the areas where we use AI the most. Why? Because we have now all this data, and we've got these supercomputers that can digest that data very, very quickly. But the problem is we all still look at data as something you look in the rearview mirror. Business intelligence, historical. So for companies to now say, how do we use predictive, prescriptive capabilities? That means I need to be able to look forward and always make this analogy. If you're riding in a fairly new car, you have all these sensors on your car, right? And so you're driving. If you're a little bit of an older person like we are that have been driving for a while, which means we're good drivers, but we're set in our ways. So the sensor will basically tell you if there's a car in front of you or next to you. But how many times, Chris, do you go in the car and you overtake someone and you still kind of do this movement? Kind of look in your dead corner? You don't have to. That's that knee-jerk reaction. That's what we've been trained to do. So we have to let go of these old habits. We really, to take advantage of this technology, we need to do things differently and we need to look forward. That change is a lot harder than the change in the adoption of the technology. It used to be you can change very quickly and technology takes sometimes years to implement. Now these new technologies are implemented in weeks and months, but sometimes it takes years for the company to follow and truly transform their mindset.
Do you think it's a top-down approach, Bart? Do you think that it requires that executive sponsorship from the highest levels to say, we're taking this journey, this transformation journey, digital transformation, and we're going to start really as a cultural, behavioral shift, really, taking a whole different mindset? And I think there are companies that do that, but just going back, and you said it, just at our age, we get set in our ways. If it ain't broke, right? That mentality. I still wonder, though, as conference season I mentioned picks up, I'm looking forward to having conversations and hearing about the executive level. Like, what are you doing to really support these various endeavors into these various vendors, such as visibility or optimization.
Yeah.
I often wonder, I talk to some executives that are saying, I'm within 3 to 5 years of retirement. Just don't, the risk is too high if it doesn't work, and I'm trying to always think of ways to my answer is I understand it. You're very risk averse. I get it. These are massive projects. And I think we probably, as you noted in the past, these have been long and drawn out, costly, lengthy projects that, frankly, some of them have come to, once they fully implement the solution, I think you ask, it's like, is it materially better? And this is historically speaking. And I think that's probably tied into why a lot of even at the highest levels there's a little bit of resistance. I think a lot of the executives don't always involve the operations teams in those discussions until after the vendor has been on, we're going this route, deal with it. How does the executives, knowing that there's a gap, right, in age, maybe some understanding, what have you seen in your conversations with executives that are taking the right approach and how they evangelize technology within their extended orgs? I'm just because I want to know this when I talk to them, and I want to hear. I'm trying to, perspective to me is everything. So I try to play devil's advocate, but also I'm promoting technology. I'm very bullish, but also want to be realistic on what their appetite is.
Yeah, it's a definite must, Chris. I mean, if the executive leadership doesn't believe in it, it's not going to happen. First of all, you're not going to get approval. You're not going to get sign off. Because technology projects that even a few years ago will get sign off on a much lower level now goes all the way to the CFO or even the CEO in many cases. So they need to be believing in the technology. Now, if they want to digitally transform their organization, it needs to go top down. Yeah. But also, let's not forget, it cannot be something that you push down people's throats. We also have to understand that even maybe if the owner of the trucking company themselves is a 65-year-old guy that says, I'm going to bet on technology, or a lady, I'm going to bet on technology, that there's also 65-year-old drivers, 65-year-old dispatchers that you need to bring along on that journey. So it's very much of, yes, you lead by example and you set the stage, but you have to bring everyone involved. Because you know what the most costly technology is the one that the company doesn't use.
Yeah.
So you spend all this money, and I've seen that for years, companies that spent millions of dollars on a TMS and then never rolled out, or they never really used it. And people, because they didn't like it, maybe they weren't trained, or maybe they didn't see the value of it, they didn't go through enough of the change management work, they just bypassed the system, and they still did it their old-fashioned way. Now you're having a really expensive tool sitting there, like most of us have a car, and most of the time it's just sitting in the garage, not being used, right? It's a very unused asset. Don't let that happen to your technology, right?
Yeah.
And again, it's not just the executive sponsorship and leadership in it, but it's also how you treat change management, and you need to get different levels of the company engaged with it. The trick that I used to do, and I spent in the 90s, I was a trained GE Six Sigma black belt, did a lot of these improvement projects. And when we did new technology projects, my trick was I was going after the guy that was the biggest kind of the opposite of an advocate. What do we call that? The contrarian,
biggest skeptic,
or the biggest skeptic. I would go after that person, and I would make him part of the project, and I would also convince him. And I thought, if I can get him to come along, and him being part of the operations team, and people go like, oh, they changed his mind, it must be really working.
That's a great approach.
And then brought everyone along. So it's not like try to convince everyone, but yet you have to do it in a way that you can bring everyone along on the journey, or it's not going to work.
Yeah, and kind of get a little deeper there. How did you go? And I love that, because if you can win over the biggest skeptic in the organization, probability says that you'll probably have an easier time as you go along with others that maybe have the appetite. Bart, I love that. How did you, can you get a little more granular on how you went about that?
Yeah.
To win over that skeptic? Because I think even as we're Optym being an AI, optimization vendor, these are, it's this, again, going back to the generalist idea of, oh, I guess you're coming to replace my job. And there's this dynamic of, well, this vendor's presumably going to automate something I do. And so there's this natural resistance to, if I adopt this technology, am I putting myself out of a job? And there are instances where that you could probably say there's truth to that.
Right.
But when you're, again, I think you and I are in agreement, it's not going to happen. This outlook of, hey, everything is just hit a button and everything magically happens. The entire network somehow gets optimized in our case. So again, I'm going to go back to how that example of winning over that skeptic. How did you kind of use, did you sit down with them and get into your platform? Did you kind of have a conversation to understand, hey, what do you like? What do you not like? What would you like to change? Give a little more color on that, if you don't mind.
So it started with telling the people, the whole organization, what it is that we were going to go after, right?
The North Star, right?
It's kind of, this is what we're implementing, and this is what we're doing. Whether it was the telematics, and then we had the drivers come to us, or we did routing, and we had at the time 5 guys who would manually route. It was basically the boards where you had the little carts.
Oh, yeah.
And they go like, there is no way that the system can do it. So we brought them along, and the guy that vocalized the frustration and kind of the questions the most, that's the one we focused on. So part of it is you need to give people the stage to be able to respond to it. Not just say, hey, here it is, it's a done deal, but involve them in the requirements process, understand kind of what their worries are, and then be able to just communicate. Let them communicate and listen. And I think in some cases, some vendors, and I even heard that as recent as last night, where I asked, why did you pick this vendor that you're at the event of today versus others? And one person said, well, this other company came in. They didn't even want to listen to us. They said, this is what you need to do. Yeah. That's not how it works, right? You need to be, as a leader, you also need to be a good listener.
Sure.
So if you can say, well, I know what have to put in place, but there's a human element of it that people need to know they have a voice.
Yeah.
And then you take that into consideration. But it's also, if you listen, it's a lot easier to respond to the concerns if you truly understand what those concerns are. And I would say any real good technology project is always to the greater good of the company and the greater good of its people. It's just, how do you relate that? How do you make the point of, oh, it's not just to reduce cost or to eliminate resources, people in the company. It's actually done so we all have a better environment to work in. We can provide our customers a better experience. We can work better with our suppliers, and at the same time give a much better kind of platform to work in for our people at the same time. And so when we showed the technology to those folks and said, look how easy it is. Today, you're spending all day, just put those cards and it's going to take you all day. Now that same thing is being done by that computer in an hour. Now you can look at exceptions and improve that. And when people finally started seeing that, yes, the computer can do that during testing in a very accurate way, or maybe even a better way, and then on top of that gives them time to work on other things, now all of a sudden they started catching on and they saw the value. Why? Because they could also see how it positively impacted not just the company, but their own role.
I think, and the overarching theme is just, it's the trust building, right? I think that's where I've fallen short in that, as a technology vendor, just making false assumptions that people will obviously see the value that I do, but I'm very close to it and it's a new concept for them. So I like that you kind of talk about that change management, really making that investment in winning over the skeptics and really everyone else, right? And understanding how their contributions to their organization still is, it's hugely important. And I think as vendors, you mentioned the listening part. We often make these assumptions, right? We're in tech. We have, we're these with advanced degrees from these prestigious universities. And, I think often, unfortunately, people look at, trucking. Well, it's just A to B. Let us just come in and, we're going to make it efficient and we're going to change this and make this big disruption and everyone's going to be happy. And that doesn't always come to fruition. I think a big part of this, as you said, is you can't go into a space, and a lot of our technology folks in our industry don't have the backgrounds we do, right? We've lived and walked. I've sat as an operator. I understand viscerally exactly those pains that you feel. But I think that's often, unfortunately, for the technology, the polarization of the tech-focused automation, everything, and then the reality of those that have been in the industry, the domain experts that go, you guys are kind of jumping the gun. I don't think you really understand how this industry, the complexity of it, the intricacies, the nuance, right? And I think a lot of various startups are learning that, right? Yeah. So no matter how much cash you may have in terms of VC capital, et cetera, if you don't have a fundamental understanding and really embrace the opinions, the perspective of those that you're selling into, right? I think that's a missed opportunity.
Yeah, and the other part is the culture. You need to understand the culture. And I always said, maybe trucking isn't rocket science, but by the way, in rocket science, maybe you shoot off one rocket a year, although now it's almost weekly. But if trucking would be rocket science, we're shooting off millions of rockets each day. Yeah. So the complexity comes in the variability and the volume. But you need to be respectful of the culture, understand that things are being done in trucking a certain way. Right. People do things a certain way. And that's where the difference is. And I think as a good vendor partner, you need to understand both the part of, yes, here's the technology, here's how you can apply it, but I'm also respectful to the culture. I want to be part of your culture. I want to be integrated as a true partner in your organization, because I think only then can it work. When, it used to be, technology used to be something you would sell as a product. Yeah. Remember, we're old enough that you would buy an upgrade for Windows. It used to come in a disc, right? Actually, you could buy it at the Walmart. Yeah. It was a product sitting on a shelf in a box. Now it's all in the cloud, so you don't see it. Right. So it's gone from a product to a platform to, I would say, now the best technology vendors are companies that have become true partners. Yeah. And also when you have that, people see you as a partner, it allows your company to grow, because they're going to go, you know what? You help me fix this problem. And I know maybe you don't have a product today that can solve it. And I think you guys are a good example of that, saying you guys are great at rail and at air. Now we're going into trucking. Yeah. Now we have LTL. Mm-hmm. And you do full truckload. Right. It's because people have trust in the organization and they look at you to help you solve other problems. So now the way you can organize and grow your company is different, because you're seen as a true partner, and you're walking side by side. The success of your customer is your success. Rather than I'm just selling products, it's implemented, we're gone. Yeah. And that's the other thing, is you can't do it that way anymore, because a lot of things, again, I go back to the example of TMS. People would come to me when I was at Gartner and said, Bart, we have a TMS and it doesn't work anymore. We don't get productivity. I said, well, when did you implement this? 10 years ago. Yeah. Well, has your organization changed? Yeah, we acquired several businesses. Has the industry changed? Oh, dramatically. When was the last time you made any changes in your settings or in your optimization? 10 years ago when we implemented.
Right. And that's reality. Yeah.
And that's reality, right? Yeah. So you see as well that with support of the solutions also come continuously fine-tuning, because every area changes. And coming back to maybe your previous question, to say, how do the executives, how do they drive the leadership? Or maybe if they're a little bit more like, maybe I'll wait it out. Yeah. So the other analogy you hear me talk a lot about is supply chains and Formula One. Sure. Because Formula One was all about the hardware and the driver. It was the best car and the best driver would win every time. Now it's all based on data. It's all these sensors on the car that grabs all the data, and the guys that make the best strategic decision on when to come in for tires, when to fuel, when to do all these other things, they're the guys that win. Yeah. Or the guys that come in for a tire change, and you go like, well, if you do that in 3 seconds, 5 seconds, it's just 2 seconons difference. Well, in today's world, in supply chain, 2 seconds is the difference between winning and losing. Yeah. But the other thing is when companies, when they look, so imagine that car is basically just a big piece of software. You're continuously fine-tuning that and putting in new technologies to help your car go faster. Well, if your car now goes faster by a fraction of a second, but you do that 200 turns,
it adds up. Yeah.
It adds up, and it's going to win. That's how people need to look at supply chains. And the risk is, if you don't keep up with the change of technology, you're going to be lagging behind. Yeah. And in a lot of industries, they are very competitive. They are very cutthroat, because, to be honest, most products have become commodities. That's right. A lot of products. And maybe even price isn't the differentiation. It's how well you fulfill the logistics promise, right? Because it's really, you're making a promise that I'm going to give you and get you that product intact, no damage, as you requested it, for the price we agreed, but we're going to get it to you on time. Yeah. And so logistics, that's why logistics has become so important, and why continuously adopting that technology to stay up, not just with your customer demands, but also with competition, is so incredibly important.
Absolutely. We talked about data, right? Data. And I think that's just more, it's a table stakes, term now. Everybody understands it. I love how you kind of reference with the F1, just that people say data driven. I guess in racing, truly data driven, literally. But, I think our industry, and again, maybe it's supply chain, right? For right, wrong, or different, it is an ecosystem. Mm-hmm. It takes a village for global supply chains, even ones more domestic here, right? It's, and you're only as strong as perhaps the weakest link, right? So when you think about the data itself, do you think that we still have gotten, post-deregulation, right? Is this proliferation of, freight brokerage and everything else? Do you think that data is still at a point where we can, as an industry, unanimously agree on certain standardization, some form of governance? Or do you think that's still prohibitive in having, technology vendors that, again, all work together in an ecosystem. Do you see that access to data, the accuracy of data, do you think that's getting better? Or are we still, where are we in that evolution?
Yeah, we have access to more data. We have more vendors that are data platforms, right?
Sure.
Project 44 being one of them. But it's still in pockets, right? It's not across the supply chain. There isn't just where you can go one database as all the data in one structured format. If we look between industries, we look between countries, it's different data formats.
That's right.
So we still see a lot of work that's being done, that's being pushed, but we're not quite there yet around data standardization. Even if you look at it, discussions we're having at the World Economic Forum, how do you deal with that from a country perspective? And even there, between the U.S. that has all the great technologies and some Asian or African countries, they don't all have access to the same data. Right. They don't necessarily have all the technologies that we have. So how do you use data also to kind of democratize the capabilities people have on a global scale? So I think we still have a lot of work ahead of us, but it's opportunity.
Sure.
And with all this intelligence, with AI, we are seeing that we can actually get to a point where we get more data, but we can make better sense out of data. We can understand it's good quality data. We can create data where there isn't none, generative AI that can create this synthetic or artificially created data as well. So we are improving, but standardization and data standardization is a big part of that. We're making progress, but it's, I would say, very, very slow. And then the other part is data isn't always right. I'll give you one example, right? In certain fields, let's say in the medical field. So there was this example of an MRI scan that was done, gave all the data points, gave it to the AI machine. The AI machine came to the conclusion that this person didn't need like a viewing operation, that nothing was wrong.
Right.
The people said, I don't know. Second opinion, went to two different doctors, both doctors more than 25 years experience in their field. They both agreed. They said, the data doesn't show it, but based on our personal experience, we feel there's something else going on. Yeah. So we want to do the surgery just to see what's going on. Guess who was right?
Guess the docs.
It was the doctors.
Yeah.
So in some cases, right, the AI and the data doesn't show always 100% of what's out there.
Yeah.
Right. So that's why you still need these humans to be able to say, hey, I want you to give me the insights at fingertips. But in some cases, not always, some cases, I want to make that decision because there are things that I know that the computer might never know or can never make that same decisions.
Yeah.
But in some cases, you can automate it. And we've seen examples of that as well, where the people said, or the company said, I don't want that automated. I want a person at the end make the decision and be able to override the decision. And then they came to the conclusion that 20% of the decisions were wrong. And then they analyzed it and they said the 20% was wrong is where the human actually corrected the machine and said, no, got to do this other thing.
Yeah.
And it was wrong. So that, I think, is also very hard to understand. What parts can you really automate? And again, part of that is testing. And what parts do you really still have that human as a central part to make that final decision?
Yeah, and I think we often get into this notion that it is a man versus machine, the versus being the operative word. And I think Optym and hopefully others, right, are realizing to your exact point that there are, it is a balance and harmonization component right there. We need to, and I think that really encompasses all aspects of the adoption because people want to feel valued, and we've talked about that earlier, but also coming to the conclusion that machines are going to be more efficient, faster, more accurate in other areas, and expose us to things through data that we as humans just aren't really capable of being able to compute, at least not at that rate, at that speed, at that level of accuracy. So I couldn't agree more. And I think that, the medical situation where, or a human pilot, the instinct that humans have, or it's just the sheer number of experience that a surgeon may have that just kind of knows. And I think that's something we really need to be very realistic about as we, regardless, medicine, and even logistics, supply chain, right? We need to make sure that the human element always understands that, again, going back, we can't do it without your inputs. Right. And I think there's this notion that, again, that resistance to, if it's smarter than me, what good am I? And I think, again, I can only speak for our industry, that is the furthest thing from the truth. So I think, again, when we go into various engagements with Optym, we really, it all ties in. How are we really making sure that everyone that's involved in these discussions is feeling like their voice is heard and really fundamentally understanding that there is no way even at an optimal network level, that we can, somehow assume that it isn't going back to that hit a button and somehow magically everything's going to be perfect. So I like this idea of this, your recommendation engine. And I think there's, again, a human element of saying, I don't really feel comfortable giving complete control over to any form of automation, at least not for the foreseeable future, because I don't trust it yet. Yeah. And I don't know how many times I can tell you in optimization outputs, mathematically, something makes sense. But then you get down to that tribal knowledge and nuance, down to what we're talking about human drivers and driver preferences, right? It doesn't matter what your output says. You're in a situation now where you can do what an AI engine had told you to do, or you can listen to the inputs from that human element, the operator, the dispatcher, and the driver, and saying, hey, otherwise you may have made this assumption, but let me tell you why this would never work. And am I willing to, I've had dispatchers go, if I really am forced to take your recommendation without my own input, that driver is going to quit, for example. He's just not, he or she is not going to do this. So I think companies have to, it goes back again, we think in trucking and logistics a lot, it's that 80-20, right? 80% a lot is fairly static, fairly just routine. That's where I see a huge amount of automation to give back that time in the day to those folks to focus on that 20% exceptions and also do the human-to-human interactions, right? Often say in trucking, I've said this numerous times, you look at the drivers, right? It can be lonely out there on the road. I remember back in my earlier days sitting in a brokerage desk where you book the load quickly, but the drivers hasn't interacted with humans for possibly, days, weeks on end, and they just want to talk. And so I'm trying to convey and articulate to folks that we work with, what if you had more time to focus on that human-to-human engagement? What would that do for the quality of life, culture, right? Yep. Drivers being able to, evangelize, saying this is a culture. And I think there's some good trucking companies out there that do that, and drivers stay loyal to that. And we're at an industry where there's at least 100% turnover in the driver population community relative to their loyalty to any one company. I think that's often where the mark, it's missed. Yeah. So I'm hopeful that we can bridge that gap. And I think, again, people fast forward to the end of the movie without realizing there's going to be various chapters or there's episodes, if you will, on how we roll this out. And again, it's that joint effort between the human side and the AI or the machine side.
I fully agree. Again, it's that, don't look at it as black and white, right?
It's not
man
binary.
Versus
it's
machine.
Not binary.
It's man and machine.
Yeah.
So look at examples during COVID, right? So people might say, well, all these Zoom calls, I'm sick and tired of it, right? I want in person. But, during COVID, when we were all kind of segregated and we were kind of confined to our own jail that was our house. Zoom or those kind of platforms were the only way we were able to have contact with other people. I know.
That's right.
Yeah. I used it a lot, for not just for work, but in the evenings we did a lot of happy hours. We did virtual dinners, virtual wine tastings, and it brought people closer together. Yeah. So technology can be used for that. The other part is, a good example I always think of is exoskeletons, right? Yeah. These are these kind of robotic kind of skeletons people can use. So it's being held for people that are paralyzed for them to walk again.
Very cool. Yeah.
But also for people in warehouses that, when you don't want them, or baggage handlers that you don't want them to lift all that stuff, well, you have an exoskeleton. All of a sudden, a human can lift 150 pounds without any pressure.
Yeah.
And that's technology, but that's a collaboration between man and technology. So I think there's a lot of ways to look at how do these two fit. But again, big part of that is culture. Yeah. It can't be a culture clash. And that's where you have to kind of talk to people. The other part is it's a journey. You can't go from, I'm doing everything in Excel spreadsheet to tomorrow,
full
automate. Right? Yeah. That's culture shock. And there are different people as well, because look at, for example, in utilities, and that's already been happening for many years. A lot of utility companies that says, you know what, when people call in with a question or they want to talk about an invoice, we're going to automate all of that, 100%. You know what happened? You had older people that just want to hear a person. They would actually switch providers because they can never talk to a person.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's up to a point, but there's still people that want that human interaction. Sometimes, older people might just call because that's maybe only other living person that they will talk to that day. They're lonely. Right. So they want to talk to a person. So it can be very frustrated for all these processes to be, let's say we travel a lot, right? Yeah. You call American Airlines and you can have a person, but a lot of times they go first. It's like, try to solve this.
The prompt
automate it through, through the prompts. I immediately go operator, right? Just give me
speak to a representative.
Yes. Right. And I think that's the other part is we shouldn't forget that human interaction is still very important. But let's do it where it makes a difference, where we can very easily and very, I would say, efficiently work together. Not like, unfortunately, a lot of places in corporate America where it's meeting after meeting and you're just having 20 people together. So afterwards you can say, well, who was part of the meeting? So who was all part of the discussion? And you kind of diffuse the decision between all the people that were present in the meeting. So there's a lot of efficiencies to be made there, but there is no, I would say, real substitute for real important things with humans and especially networking of humans.
I'm so glad we talked about that component, probably more so than we have on this the show before, because I think we get so caught up in the tech side of things because it's sexy and everyone's talking about it. But we often fail to really, accentuate the human aspect, the cultural aspect. And I'm so glad we covered that today. Well, Bart, we've covered a lot of topics. I kind of ask, what we probably could have opened up with this, but I know your background to an extent. You've obviously been in the industry as myself for many years. But what got you into this industry all along? And I know this is kind of retro in the conversation. And what excites you most about the next 3, 5, 10 years? And it could be technology, could be an overarching theme that includes technology. Just I always like to get kind of more of, let's get to know Bart a little more personal level. So tell us how.
I would say it's a little bit by coincidence, right? I started in the construction industry, believe it or not. My dad had a construction company in Belgium, and there was 2 things that I quickly realized. I wasn't passionate about the construction industry. And secondly, being the son of the CEO doesn't really help with how people look at you. And I'm sure a lot of people in trucking, because a lot of them are family-owned businesses, go through the same thing. So I said, Dad, I got to go and venture on my own. And so I did. So I worked for a couple of companies, really got a basis under me. So I worked for Ernst & Young and then GE. It's really through GE and G Capital specifically that I got into logistics, because they started a logistics company to provide logistics services to all the GE manufacturing businesses in Europe. They did that as a joint venture with Penske Logistics in the U.S. We called it Penske Logistics Europe. I was part of the first people in. And then we started buying asset-based businesses. So we had a 3PL side. We also had the asset-based side. I came at it more from a merger acquisition finance perspective. And we had a couple of the acquisitions that weren't working very well. So I went and kind of did an analysis of what was going on. And the president of the company saw it and he said, hey, I like your analysis. Now let's go put it in place.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden my role changed to a lot more operational in nature. Which kind of like a deep dive or baptism by fire. I always called it, but that's really how I got in the depths of working with, all these truck drivers. And at the time we didn't have a lot of female drivers in Europe. Now we're seeing more and more female drivers coming into the industry and working with them, which isn't always easy. But I loved that. I loved kind of what we could do and some of the changes we could provide in the processes, but also then starting in the 90s, as I mentioned before, started really applying technology. And all of a sudden I go like, I love this industry and I love the combination of logistics with technology because there wasn't too much of that. And that's kind of how I continued my whole career, went to a couple of tech startups and spent 10 years at PepsiCo and then spent 8 years at Gartner researching it, then Project 44, and now as a strategic advisor. I just love the logistics industry. We are so important, and I'm just so amazed right now that finally, right, for many people, for me, it was a personal journey of over 30 years that people now finally start looking at, hey, logistics is important. 30 years ago, people said, Bart, what are you doing in logistics? They've kind of felt like I was throwing my life away. Why don't you do something else?
I think I got the same conversation.
Loved it, right? Yeah. But now people, when you say you're in logistics, they go, because they understand it. And that's why I'm so, I would say, motivated to keep doing this and keep driving it from a thought leadership perspective. And yes, there's things that are going wrong, but we have so much opportunity in this industry to make change, to get opportunity, to collaborate. And collaboration, by the way, it's not just, suppliers and customers and trucking companies. It's technology vendors. They can help companies to adopt technology a lot better because they're already behind the scenes work together. It's collaboration within enterprises because, truth to be told, many, even the large companies in the world, still very siloed, right? Where transportation in many cases is an afterthought. They're not part of the table when it comes to supply chain planning. That needs to be more collaborative.
Yeah.
But we have such an incredible opportunity in this industry to drive forward, to get to this next stage by adopting more technology, be more collaborative, looking at things. And I think with the support that we have and now the importance that is put on logistics, this is the best time to be in this environment. And that's why I'll probably be doing this for another 10, 20, 30 years if I'm still alive, because I'm so passionate about it and because it's fun.
Yeah.
I think logistics people are some of the best people out there.
Yeah.
And although it's a massive industry, as well, it seems to be more like a small family.
It feels that
and
way.
You keep running into the same people. So from that perspective, if you're in logistics, best place to be in. If you're not in logistics, come to logistics. If you're thinking, maybe if you're younger and thinking, what should I major in? Supply chain and logistics. We need good talent to the industry.
Yeah.
Because that's the other part. That's going to help us fulfill this whole vision of what the future can look like.
That's right.
Is this new digital talents that's passionate about it. And I've seen some of these students that now are picking supply chain, or picking logistics as a study, which we didn't have the opportunity.
It wasn't even offered.
It wasn't offered.
Yeah.
And that know what they're walking into, and they are so incredibly motivated and so passionate about it already. So my feeling is I think we're in a pretty good spot where we are today. A lot of work ahead of us.
Sure.
Which is good for both of us, right? It's not like tomorrow all of a sudden there will be anything left to do in logistics, but there's a long way ahead of us, and I think it's just going to be, as they say, a hell of a ride.
Well, I'm glad to be a part of it as well. Well, Bart, hey, thanks again for the time today, man. I appreciate you taking time. I know you're a busy guy, and thanks for everybody else for tuning in today for another episode of Semi-Related with Bart De Muynck. Hopefully you'll see Bart and myself if you happen to be attending some of the upcoming conferences in the industry. I think we're going to be pretty jam-packed schedules for the next few weeks on end.
That's right.
Longer. So please come up and say hello to Bart if you see him out on the road, and myself included. And again, Bart, thanks again for joining us today.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, appreciate
Great to
it.
be here.
Likewise.
Appreciate it.